All right. Good evening, everybody. I'll post a link in the description. So this is just a short little video. I don't usually do them this early. It's usually my nighttime thing. If you like the content, hit the subscribe button. I know it sounds cliche and begging, but this is a reference to you know, a comment left on the video that I responded, and then that person responded to me. It was actually in regards to a specific fighter, from the old school Ultimate Fighting. Um, back when it was controversial and this style versus that style in no weight classes. And, we all know people like to make documentaries about certain people, and sport fighters are among them. And, my comment in that video was, yeah, most of the karate guys got their asses handed to them. One, they didn't train for that. And if they were smart, they probably trained for such opponents the very next day, such as, a wrestler, a Gracie, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because that was predominantly who was winning those. Although there was, you get your outlier example of, I think it was either Extreme or World Combat. It was one of the lesser leagues that never got a footing, where it had 3 weight classes, and the middleweight class, it was won by a karate guy, versus a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy. So again, an outlier, and it boils it down to who wants it more. But that's and also the no weight classes. So the initial comment on that video was in reference to the fighter, the documentary on the fighter Dan Severn. He went by Dan the Beast Severn. He was a wrestler. That was his primary discipline. Was collegiate wrestling. I wrestled in high school for a year. I was never any good at it. I did make a record of most losses. I don't know. Is that maybe I get a participation trophy award or something? Anyhow, that's neither here nor there. So obviously, that guy, much like his counterpart Gracie, when they debuted, they basically, especially Gracie, he won the first 5, and then that was basically like, if you saw a Gracie in there, save your money. Anyhow, but Dan Severn, he was a big guy, and he, much like Gracie's other challenging opponent, Chemo, they were powerfully built individuals, and they both gave Gracie a challenge. And one of the comments on the Severn video was, he was a bully. He was dropping people half his size. Well, actually, I'm about half his size, maybe a little over, because you actually had to weigh a minimum, I think, of 175 pounds to even be remotely considered. But I digress. Sure, most of his opponents were smaller than him, because there were no weight classes. I mean, you had a 700-pound sumo wrestler in there, and I think in another one you had a 400-pound sumo wrestler, and then you had, the barroom brawler, Tank Abbott, who had a wrestling and boxing background as himself, but Dan Severn also beat the opponents that were bigger than him. Paul Varlins and who's the other one? Fuck. Oh, Tank Abbott. Yeah, that was the other one. And that was like the rare time where you saw somebody who was an absolute unit in his own right had to go up against somebody bigger and still beat them. And obviously, the reason he lost to Gracie because he didn't have the technical skills, the grappling skills, and obviously he had the power, and if he developed the technical skills, which I'm sure later on he did pick up. I'm pretty sure he did pick up some other training as well. But again, there's the other thing with the Ultimate Fighting thing that I want to make in response to that comment. Every single one of those people who competed in that, they signed that dotted line. They signed that dotted line. It's just like any other sport. You know, when you sign up to participate, you're signing that dotted line. You're saying, hey, you know, you're not going to hold the organization liable if you get hurt. You know, and I'm sure that was written into that contract. And, you know, obviously the money was shit. You know, and again, to my point, which I made in, you know, my comment, Mike Tyson didn't enter that. Why would he? You know, he made way more money in the boxing ring. In fact, actually, let me, just for giggles and shits, type in, how much does a boxer actually make? How much does a boxer make a year? All right, we'll go with that. A professional boxer typically... I don't know where that author got millions of dollars, maybe over the course of the career, but this is the actual definition according to AI. Let's see what it actually. Okay. How much you really make? Understand the earnings. So this one's actually good. Fight TV. So it varies, obviously. It's a big range in certain weight classes. So yeah, you know, at the start they're making, you know, less than 50K, but then there's prize money. So let me just see. It varies greatly. Top tiers can earn millions per bouts, and that's probably because of the sponsorships they're receiving. But if you're not receiving, yeah, 40K, 60, yeah, that's probably not worth it. You're getting your head bashed in a bunch of time. Okay, Floyd Mayweather, he exceeded $1 billion in his career. And then there was the one with Conor McGregor. So, all right. Jake Paul. All right, so yeah, some boxers can actually make good money. So enough about that. I do this. I go off on a tangent on my videos. So let's get back into the topic. Mike Tyson didn't enter the old school UFCs because again, why would he? The money was fucking shit. In fact, let me, how much money does a UFC fighter make? All right. Okay. Several million per fight. Okay, so it's pretty similar now. How much money did early UFC fighters make? Early UFCs. Yeah, see the early UFCs, they made about 10,000 per fight. All right, I don't want to see. All right. How much money? Type in a specific name. Let me type in the winner. In the 1993 season. All right, that'll work. Earned 50K. You know, tournament winner. So, yep, that's around accurate. I thought it was 30K, but so that was pretty accurate. It was shit money back then, and you had to actually win the damn thing to fucking make the money. They may have had second and third place. I don't really know. Let me know if you have any insight on that. But you get my point. Mike Tyson was making more money in the boxing ring than he would if he had entered the UFC. So it was just cost versus benefit analysis. But let's get back to the topic on hand here. Now I know in some of the interviews he had, Dan Severn, much like many other fighters, they come across, as a little bit pompous. Even Brock Lesnar when he lost to Frank Mir the first time, and yes, he was a rookie, but it was what it was. I don't believe Dan Severn actually won any of those tournaments completely, but there were other wrestlers who did later on. Mark Coleman being one, and Kevin Randleman may still rest in peace. He was another one, and they also cross-trained. But again, all three examples mentioned, obviously wrestlers are explosive. Trust me, I know. I wrestled in high school, and I broke a record of the most losses in a season. All of them. So that means I was not any good at it. Anyhow, so that's that. The point I'm making in this video is when you're signing up to do a sport, especially combat sport, you're signing a waiver. Or hell, you're signing a waiver when you do any sport, knowing that there is a small chance that you could die, get injured, and that waiver says you can't turn around and sue them, unless it can be proven that it was maliciously done. I mean, hell, I have training in karate. I had to sign that waiver. I mean, I also did when I dabbled in MMA myself. I had to sign that waiver saying, if I get injured, I'm not going to turn around and sue them. Because, there is and same thing, well, my parents had to sign the form because I was in high school. You're signing a waiver knowing that there is a risk of injury. And some sports have more injury risks than others. Some have more risk of, lesser injuries, while others have less risk of lesser injuries, but more risk of, grave injuries, such as karate, boxing. I think boxing might have both, but I digress, and, again, the point, when you're signing up to do any type of physical activity, exercise, sports, you're signing a dotted line saying you're removing them from all liability. And like I said, every single one of those fighters, whether it was Royce Gracie at 6'1", 170, another one, we lose Keith Hackney. They said he was around 200. He signed the same one. His first opponent, the sumo wrestler, Emmanuel Yarborough, may he still rest in peace. He signed the same thing. Except they all signed that form. So they all knew that there was not going to be any weight classes. Anyhow, that's my take on it. I'll talk to you.